You ever notice how some of the toughest, sharpest, most powerful people in the world often carry the deepest scars? Simon Cowell, the man who gave us American Idol, The X Factor, and Got Talent, might look like the ruthless judge who built stars out of nobodies, but behind that glare is a story you probably weren't ready to hear. This is not just about TV, fame, or money. It's about pain, survival, scandal, and a fragile humanity hiding beneath one of the most famous poker faces on earth. And trust me, you won't look at him the same way after this. Let's rewind for a second. Everyone knows Simon as the kingmaker, the guy who could destroy your dream with a single eyebrow raise or turn you into a superstar with one yes. But before the fame, before the headlines, Simon was invisible. He grew up in a household where affection wasn't exactly a family currency. His mom, Julie, was a ballerina who carried herself with elegance, but kept emotions at arm's length. His dad, Eric, a music executive, believed in discipline and achievement, not in telling his son, I'm proud of you. Simon would later admit, my father never once said those words, even when I needed it the most. That missing piece, that tiny phrase, haunted him for decades. School didn't help either. He wasn't the star student. He was the troublemaker, the restless kid who always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. By the time he left with just a couple of qualifications in hand, Simon carried more shame than hope. In his world, excellence was the only currency that mattered, and he felt broke. Out of pity, not pride, his father landed him a job in the mailroom at EMI Records. Imagine this, a future titan of entertainment running around with coffee, sorting letters for rock stars who didn't even know his name. He said it himself. He was invisible in a world obsessed with the spotlight, and it crushed him. He once admitted to crying quietly in the bathroom after work, convinced his life had already peaked. But instead of breaking him, that pain did something else. It hardened him. Rejection became his training ground. Loneliness became fuel, and slowly, humiliation turned into defiance. By the 80s, he rolled the dice with his own record label, Fanfare Records. For a moment, it looked like he had cracked the code. One of his first hits, Sunita's So Macho, was everywhere. Suddenly, the boy who carried mail was hosting parties with the very people who used to ignore him. But just as quickly as it rose, it crashed. The market shifted, the label collapsed, and Simon lost everything: money, friends, reputation. He had no choice but to move back in with his parents, sleeping in the same room that once made him feel small as a kid. He later said he felt like a ghost haunting his own life. But here's the twist: that failure, that complete collapse, became the foundation of everything he would build later, because from then on, Simon understood fame wasn't about chasing critics. It was about giving people what they wanted. By the 90s, he was back in the game, this time at BMG, where he signed acts critics hated but the public adored. Boy bands like Westlife, duos like Robson and Jerome, music that sold millions while insiders sneered. Simon didn't care. He had learned the golden rule: sell records first, earn respect later. And then 2001 changed everything. Pop Idol. His blunt honesty, what many saw as cruelty, was exactly what TV needed. Millions tuned in, not just for the singers, but to watch Simon slice through the fluff with his raw truth. A year later, American Idol launched in the US, and Simon Cowell went from music executive to cultural phenomenon. His smirks, his silences, his brutal one liners, those became as famous as the stars he discovered. Soon, the X Factor and Got Talent spread across the world, and at his peak, more than 600 million people were watching shows stamped with his name. The press called him the most powerful man in television. But here's the cost: that power came with crushing loneliness. He later admitted, even surrounded by lights and applause, I often felt completely alone. For a man who gave millions recognition, he often ended his nights with no one to recognize him. And then came 2013, the scandal that nearly destroyed him. The world found out he was expecting a child with Lauren Silverman, who at the time was married to one of his close friends. The tabloids went nuclear. Headlines screamed betrayal, trust shattered, friendships evaporated. Simon, the man who built his empire on control, suddenly had no control at all. He later admitted, it was not something I'm proud of. And yet, out of that chaos came something beautiful. His son, Eric, born in 2014, became the miracle that saved him. Overnight, Simon shifted from contracts to Lego towers, from boardrooms to bedtime stories. He said my world wasn't about ratings anymore. It was about him. Fatherhood softened him, gave him purpose, and pulled him back from a dark path. But the scars of that scandal never fully healed. Then came more heartbreak. In 2015, Simon lost his mother. She had been his anchor, even through a rocky childhood. Her death broke him in ways the public never saw. Years earlier, in 1999, he had buried his father too, a man whose approval he had chased his whole life but never got. Losing both parents left him fragile. He confessed, "Losing my mom was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. For someone who built his life on applause, the silence after her passing was unbearable." If that wasn't enough, tragedy struck again in 2020. Simon was testing a powerful new electric bike in Malibu when a second of miscalculation sent him crashing to the ground. His back shattered. Hours of surgery followed, a steel rod implanted in his spine. He later admitted, "I came within a minute of not making it." For a man, defined by control, being bedridden, unable to move, was torture. But the thought of leaving his young son fatherless gave him the will to fight. Slowly, painfully, he learned to walk again. And then, as if fate was mocking him, he suffered another e-bike accident in 2022, breaking his arm and bruising his face. Headlines called him reckless, fragile, even foolish. But Simon came out of it changed. He said, "It changed me in every possible way." He realized that no empire mattered without health, without family, without tomorrow. And then there's the face story. Years of Botox and fillers eventually caught up to him. By 2021, he barely looked like himself. Fans were shocked. Memes spread. For a man who made a career out of judging appearances, suddenly becoming the object of ridicule was brutal. He admitted, "I went too far. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself." That was his breaking point. He stopped the treatments, deciding to age naturally. It was more than a cosmetic choice, it was acceptance. He wasn't chasing youth anymore, he was chasing authenticity. And when he reappeared, lined face and all, people saw not a mogul hiding behind injections, but a man willing to be human. That vulnerability made him more relatable than ever. But the cruelest blow came in September 2024. Liam Payne, one of the boys Simon handpicked for One Direction, died at just 31 after a fall from a hotel balcony. For Simon, it was like losing family. He remembered Liam's nervous audition back in 2010, the spark in his eyes, the simple yes that unlocked a global phenomenon. To lose him so young, Simon said, was like losing a son. He had known loss before, his parents, his accidents, but this was different. It was unnatural, unfair, cruel. The world mourned with vigils and tributes, but Simon's grief was private. He clung to his son tighter, replayed old audition tapes, and spoke less about fame and more about family. He began to understand legacy not as empire, but as presence. Now in 2025, Simon Cowell is 65. He still sits on the Got Talent panel, but the sharp, ruthless judge has softened into more of a mentor. At home, his Beverly Hills mansion isn't a trophy anymore, it's a sanctuary. His mornings are careful, built around exercises to protect his back. His meals are meticulously planned for his health. His eyesight is fading, and the thought of one day not seeing his son's face clearly terrifies him. But despite the pain, the anxiety, the scars, every laugh from Eric, every bedtime story, every piano key hit offbeat is worth more to him than the billions he's made. Yes, the empire is still there. Mansions, cars, private jets. But he rarely uses them. He's already drafted his will. Eric won't inherit billions. Instead, the money will go to foundations for children's health care, education, and creative opportunities. I don't want him to inherit money, Simon has said. I want him to inherit values his face tells the rest of the story, lined, gray, real. He's done with pretending, done with chasing youth. He's chasing memories now. Now here's something wild. Simon, the man who practically invented the modern talent show, doesn't even see himself as the star of his own story. In private, he's admitted that he never thought he had real talent himself. He couldn't sing, couldn't dance, wasn't a natural performer. What he did have was an eye, an instinct, that golden eye for spotting something in someone else that nobody else could see. And if you think about it, that's what makes his journey so ironic. He spent his life giving the spotlight to others while deep down he wrestled with whether he deserved it himself. But here's the twist most people don't realize. That ruthless persona we all remember, the cutting remarks, the brutal honesty, that wasn't just for TV. That was Simon building armor. Armor against the same rejection that haunted him as a kid. If he struck first, no one could strike him. If he set impossibly high standards, then no one could call him a fraud. The audience saw cruelty. What they didn't see was the boy who spent his teenage years invisible, terrified of never being enough. That boy grew up, put on a designer suit, and turned his childhood pain into primetime television. Still, even armor eventually cracks. And as Simon grew older, the cracks showed. You saw it after his mother's passing. You saw it in the wheelchair photos after his bike accident. You saw it when he admitted he no longer recognized his own reflection after too much Botox. These weren't the moments of the all-powerful TV titan. These were moments of fragility, raw, human, and honest. And honestly, that's what made him more relatable than ever. Another thing that's easy to forget, Simon never actually wanted to be famous. He wanted success, yes. He wanted control. But fame, that came as a side effect. He's confessed more than once that being recognized everywhere he goes, being chased by paparazzi, having strangers shouting his name, it often left him feeling trapped. At his peak, he was adored and despised in equal measure, but either way, he was never invisible again. And ironically, sometimes he wished he could be. But the biggest transformation of all hasn't been business or scandal or even fatherhood. It's his relationship with time. When you survive what he survived, when you get that close to losing it all, your whole perspective changes. Simon doesn't rush anymore. He doesn't care about being everywhere at once. He's cut back travel. He's selective about projects. And he's openly said he values one quiet night with his son more than a season finale watched by millions. That's a massive shift for a man who once measured life in ratings. And let's talk about legacy for a second, because legacy is a word Simon has been throwing around more lately, not legacy in terms of television formats or record sales, but legacy in terms of impact. What will people remember about him when the lights fade? He's been quietly setting up foundations, giving scholarships, funding programs for young musicians. He wants to be remembered not just as the Mr. Nasty judge, but as the guy who gave opportunities to kids who otherwise had none. In a way, it's his attempt to rewrite his own childhood, to give others the approval and the chance he spent years craving. Now, some people ask, has Simon changed? The answer is yes and no. The fire is still there. He's still ambitious, still sharp, still has that instinct that built a global empire. But the edges have softened. The priorities have shifted. Fame doesn't excite him. Fortune doesn't drive him. Health, family, purpose. Those are the currencies he deals in now. And maybe that's why his story resonates so much, because deep down, it's not about Simon Cowell at all. It's about all of us, about how life humbles you, reshapes you, forces you to slow down and figure out what really matters. Think about it. Here's a man who went from being overlooked in a mailroom to mocked by critics to becoming the most powerful figure in global television. He built an empire, lost it, built it again. He faced scandals that could have ended him. He lost the people he loved most. He nearly lost his life in a freak accident. And yet, here he is, scarred, humbled, but still standing. That's not just a story of fame. That's a story of survival. And maybe that's the real lesson. That success isn't about never falling. It's about how many times you're willing to rise after the fall. Simon's empire might one day fade. His shows might eventually end. His fortune might change hands. But the story of how he fought, endured, and transformed, that will last. So the next time you see Simon Cowell on TV, sitting behind that desk, leaning back with that trademark smirk, remember this. Behind that smirk is a man who has cried in silence, broken bones, buried parents, endured humiliation, faced ridicule, and still found the strength to keep going. That's the story worth remembering. And now I'll leave you with one question. If someone wrote your story, what would it say about how you rose after the fall? So, what can we take from all of this? Maybe it's this. Life will scar you, break you, test you in ways you never expect. But what defines you isn't the pain, it's what you do after. Simon stumbled, failed, made mistakes in full view of the world. But he also kept moving, kept fighting, kept changing. His story isn't about a perfect rise, it's about survival, redemption, and learning to turn power into purpose. So here's the question for you. What lesson do you take from his journey? To slow down before fate forces you to? To treasure laughter over applause? To live for presence, not possessions? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story made you think, even for a second, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about legends, they're about the fragile, flawed, and very human lives behind them.